Alright, hello, welcome. My name is Shaina, I'm an astrologer, and today we are finishing my little mini-series here on the essential dignities in astrology. This is part of my bigger, more enveloping. This is part of my bigger course, which is my free learn astrology course, okay? We're currently in 201, but if you're like, oh my god, 201, that sounds a little bit advanced for me. Maybe it is. If not, no worries, I have a bunch of other videos. This is like the 14th video in this series, and I'll link it up here in the cards. Before I get any further though, let me get the advertising out of the way. I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. It's been really nice to get to connect to you guys, and I really appreciate it. I have an astrology TikTok where I post pretty much every day, and I do lives every Monday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time if you want to hang out and chat with me. And then I also have a personal Instagram. But enough of that. These videos have all been really long, so let me just get into it. So the essential dignities are like the assignments that astrologers give to energies if they're kind of, you know, more intuitive or more unintuitive, more naturally harmonious, more naturally unharmonious. And this all has to do with planetary placements, okay? Especially like in a birth chart specifically. The first two are a little bit more, I almost want to say like scientific, although I don't know if that's the right word for them. They have a little bit more backing. I feel like they hold a little bit more ground, I guess I should say, than the other two. But basically the first one is domicile that I talked about, which is basically when a planet is in its home ruler. So for example, I've always been using, you know, the sun is at home in Leo because the sun rules Leo. That's its domicile. And then we have detriment, which just basically means that that planet is in the opposite sign to the one it rules. So for example, Leo is opposite to Aquarius, so the sun would be in its detriment in Aquarius, okay? And then last week, I talked about exaltations. I went over it a little bit more in the previous video, but it's just basically what astrologers say are the best placements to have. Not even the most intuitive, just these are the best, right? Domicile and detriment are more intuitive or unintuitive, and now we're on to exaltation and fall, which are more like really labeled as like best and worst. I don't know, which is so funny to me because I feel like so much of the astrology community is like, how dare you say those words, which I totally get where they're coming from. But yeah, no, these are what astrologers say are the best and worst placements. So exalted is what's considered the best. I talked about that in my previous video, which I'll link right here if you haven't seen it. It's good to kind of know what's exalted first so you understand why and where it's coming from. So then of course, the opposite of that is in its fall. Placements that are in their fall, which is what we're talking about today. Basically all a fall planet is when a planet is in a sign that's opposite to its exaltation. So the sun is exalted in Aries, which I talked about last week, and the opposite of Aries is Libra. So the sun is in its fall in Libra. Okay, so you just take all the stuff in its exaltations and take its opposite and or sister sign, which I'll link the video of the 12 zodiac signs which I made, which go over their sister signs and like their opposite signs. So if you need to know a little bit more about that, that video is up in the cards. But yes, basically fall is just astrologers labeled as this is the worst placement. Sucks to suck. Loser, a big giant L, right? If you have one of these, you're a loser. No, I'm just kidding. I have no exalted placements, and I have, I think, 2 of these. There's good and bad in everything, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. You know, just like I said in the exalted placements and all the other videos before this, just because something is astrologers consider, yay, this is good, doesn't mean it's all good. Just because something is considered, yo, this sucks, doesn't mean that it's all shitty, okay? Doesn't mean that it's all bad, okay? There is balance to everything, and that's what I want to talk about today. So, as I mentioned, we're going to start with the sun. So, I already gave it away, but the sun is in its fall in Libra. Okay, this I feel like is really also pretty intuitive. I do see where they're coming from here. Not because I think Libra suns are so horrible or anything, but basically it's very easy as to why the sun you can see is in its fall. Aries sun is all about me, right? And the sun is all about me. What is my personality, right? So that makes sense that Aries is in its exaltation in the sun. And what is Libra all about? It's all about you, right? It's all about what you're doing, what you're up to, what you're like. Basically the planet of me being in you, which doesn't really make any intuitive sense. Just kind of like how the sun is in its detriment in Aquarius, because that's me being about we, right? It doesn't really make any sense intuitively. I'm sure Libras will kind of understand why their sun isn't considered in their fall, but I'm sure they'll also take heavy offense to that if they didn't know. Honestly, I have found them to be a little bit sensitive to that stuff, like what other people say or what other people put labels on them, which is another reason why, you know, the sun is in its fall in Libra, because it is very conscious and very self-conscious and self-aware as to what everybody else is saying about them, what everybody else is thinking about them. So I'm like, oh, they really won't take too kindly to everybody saying that this is a shitty sun placement. They'll feel like they did something wrong. And you're not. It's just, I'm sure you understand that it's hard because you have identity issues. Like Libra suns have major identity issues. They can really struggle to know who they are, and they can really bounce their personality off of other people. However, I mean, I do think they're really good people. Like there's somebody that puts them in your shoes. These can be very beautiful people, very aesthetically pleasing people, very artistic people, very contemplative people even, because Aries is just like, it is what it is, ooga booga, you know, so Libra is a little bit more contemplative, like what if it isn't what it is? You know, what if this is all, what if we're not really sure here? What if I see the other side to this, you know? So it can be a little bit more back and forth, especially with its personality, which can cause, you know, a little bit of stress sometimes or something along those lines that Aries doesn't really have. But there is just more of an awareness that Aries lacks that Libra is really graced with. Speaking of grace, Libra has a lot of grace. Has a lot of social graces, a lot of social awareness, a lot of manners as well that Aries doesn't have. So in that way, it's not like I think that people dislike Libra suns. We tend to find them to be very pleasing and very pleasant to be around. Whereas I think people find Aries a little bit, generalizing here, a little bit obtrusive and a little bit rude and just bad-mannered, right, and selfish. Libra doesn't get those labels on them, which is what they're kind of obsessed with, right? They're more obsessed with, what do you think of me? What do you want of me? What can I do for you kind of situation. And they forget about themselves and neglect themselves a lot. So I think that Libra sun is more in its fall because it can sometimes feel like you're not the main character of your own life. And that can be very, that can be a hit to the self-esteem for sure. Whereas Aries is like, even if they're not the main character, they think they are, right? I think there's a lot of obviously like beauty to Libra sun because that's the whole point of it, and a lot of pleasure and a lot of synchronicities that they see in their life and a lot of acceptance towards others that the other sun signs don't have. But at the end of the day, it is just like spiraling identity issues, and you don't want your identity to be identity issues, which Libra can sometimes have. Also, there's, you know, their whole identity is so focused on relationships. Sometimes they forget to cultivate who they are a little bit, or they can look to others to find themselves rather than looking inside themselves. Although I do think that they are very self-reflective, in my opinion, almost a little bit too much that they get overwhelmed and lose themselves. Also, it's not competitive. It's not really about winning or losing, and a lot of times it will just win or take the fall, literally just because nobody else is. Libra always will give in and take the fall or lose or whatever it might be, you know? Next up, the moon. So the moon is in its domicile in Cancer, it's in its detriment in Capricorn, it is in its exaltation in Taurus, and it is in its fall in Scorpio. So the reason why the moon is in its fall in Scorpio, I think, is the exact opposite as to why the moon is in its fall in Capricorn, because moon in Scorpio is very emotional, and it's very emotionally charged, and it has a lot of problems regulating its emotions. It feels everything so intensely that I think the reason why it's in its fall is because it's almost too much. It's almost like it sees red emotionally, right? If that makes sense, where that's all it can see, that's all it can do. It gets like lost in it a little bit. And obviously, you know, as I mentioned with the moon in Taurus, there's usually a good significator that you have a very like traditional mom that stayed home, cooked, clean, made sure the house was nice for you. Or if it's not a mom, it's just like a nurturing figure. Whereas the moon in Scorpio usually shows some kind of loss or breakdown of safety, of security, of that nurturing figure, whether it's a literal loss of the nurturing figure or the mother, or a metaphorical loss of the figure. There can be a lot of times some toxic connections to the mom and their child, whether that be they're too codependent. With moon in Capricorn, it's almost like the mother and the child has trouble connecting fully sometimes, especially emotionally. With moon in Scorpio, the mother or nurturing figure and the child connect too much. It's a little bit like, whoa, this child and this mom need their own space here. They need their own identity here. They need their own emotional life. Things are a little bit too intertwined with the moon in Scorpio. Or it could be a little bit of a toxic connection because there's too much of a disconnection as well, because there was that loss of that mother figure that they didn't get to really know them and experience them, and they can really yearn for that emotional connection anywhere they can find it sometimes. It can just be really hard to have a healthy detachment to things. Not that you should be, you know, I'm not trying to be like a Capricorn moon here and be like you should be detached from everything, because I don't think that's good, but there needs to be some level in life, you know, life goes on, right? And sometimes Scorpio moon has trouble with the whole like life goes on. Also, I should say, though, in the same vein, because they can hang on to things so strongly and so viscerally. You know, obviously Scorpio moon can be riddled with a lot of emotional trauma and emotional highs and lows and extremes growing up. And it's also wouldn't be surprising to me if there was a, you know, rug pulled out from under you quality when you were growing up with your safety, with your security, with your finances, with your home in any way, or just there's just instability, right? The moon is all about stability, and Scorpio moon adds extreme instability. Not like this daily little chaos, but like one or two big overarching themes that they almost have to like try to get past and get through and live with a little bit sometimes. And the moon in Scorpio can really hang on to things. I will say that that's the common thing between Taurus moon and Scorpio moon. I think they can both really hang on to things because it's a fixed sign and get stuck in them and dwell in it and sit in it forever. I guess the way that they do it is a little bit different. Like how I mentioned, like Taurus fills up the room with their emotional gunk. I think that Scorpio moon really will isolate themselves and like distance themselves from people and has troubles asking for help, and has troubles sometimes admitting that they're not okay. They don't want to seem weak sometimes. Like a lot of times they either don't want to seem like a victim or they victimize themselves too much. There's rarely like a good in between, which makes sense because they're going through a lot of shit. But I think that's also part of the Scorpio moon is there's a lot of like feeling like a victim, not wanting to be a victim, not wanting to ask for help, asking for too much help, and just not having a balance of things. Usually with Scorpio moon is one extreme or the other, and there's barely any just kind of like neutrality and chillness in that nature. I think the main reason why it's in its fall, just quickly summarize, are like two major things. One, the moon is all about security and comfort, and Scorpio is the lack of security and the lack of comfort. And then number two is just because it's like trauma. Like it's like emotional trauma, emotional manipulation, whether you're taking it or giving it emotional manipulation. And, you know, that's not fun. It's just not. Anyway, so let's go on to Mercury. So as I mentioned, I think the Mercury is really weird because it's also in its domicile in Gemini and Virgo. It's in its detriment in Pisces and Sagittarius. And then for some reason, it's also exalted in Virgo and in its fall in Pisces. So if you have a Mercury in Pisces, congratulations. You have the proud title of having two debilitations, of having a double debilitated Mercury. How fun. Not only in its detriment, but also in its fall. Ha ha ha. You know, I actually went on a big tangent at the end of last video, but I took it out because I was like, it's just a long tangent about how I think that Mercury should be exalted in Aquarius. And then somebody commented and was like, some astrologers have speculated that Mercury should be exalted in Aquarius. And I was like, I didn't even know that. I shouldn't have taken that out because I do agree. And I would fight for it being in its fall in Leo. I'm not even gonna lie. If you're wanting to know a little bit more as to why Mercury is in its fall in Pisces, I talked more about it in my previous video, which is detriment places in astrology, which I'll link right here. If you have displacement, just skip to that portion. It's labeled and watch that. But to summarize, you know, Mercury in Pisces is a little bit dumb. Like, if I just want to really summarize it, right? It's all about smarts, and Mercury is all about like the physical and the here and now, and Mercury in Pisces is all about the metaphysical and what we can't see. And so it's just really hard to make such a practical planet to be in such an impractical otherworldly energy. But again, these people's strengths are poetry, creativity, artistic nature, strong emotional empathy, strong emotional understanding that like Mercury in Virgo or Gemini would really lack. So it can be a really beautiful Mercury placement. It's just a little bit, feels a little bit topsy-turvy sometimes, you know, like these people can have struggles reading or keeping a schedule or doing their little chores. They really have no want or no will to do that a lot of the time. Also, I think in another way, Mercury in Pisces might be a little bit shy with their speech, right? Like Mercury in Virgo thinks they're right, so they're gonna say it. Gemini Mercury is just gonna say it. It doesn't really, you know, they're just gonna throw it out there no matter what, right? But Mercury in Pisces would be a little bit reflective, scared to intervene, scared to interject, a little bit more apprehensive about speaking up, being loud and proud with their speech, externalizing their speech, right? Thinking a bunch internally, but struggling to externalize it, all that kind of stuff. So it makes sense why it's in its fall, but like that's why it's in its detriment. Right? Next up, Venus. So Venus is in its domicile in Taurus and Libra. It's in its detriment in Scorpio and Aries. It's in its exaltation in Pisces. And so that means that Venus is in its fall in Virgo. So Virgo rules rules. It rules the little terms and conditions, need they apply, right? And love, as I mentioned with Venus and Pisces, is, you know, we want love to be unconditional and everlasting and pure and open-hearted, right? And Virgo is like, okay, well, but do they check off this box? And do they check off that box? Because if they check off all these boxes, then I will decide to love them. But if they don't, then I will decide that I do not love them, right? Instead of Venus and Pisces, which just kind of gets like swept away by its whims and its desires, and it just falls in love and love at first sight, and it's so romantic and it's such a hopeless romantic. Venus and Virgo is not like that. Venus and Virgo is like, ooh, I have to change my schedule to fit in a date with you. And I just don't think I could really do that right now. I'm a little busy, so I'm gonna have to skip out. I'm sure you understand. You know, and it's like, well, you know, okay, right? Whereas Venus and Pisces is like, I will stop whatever I have to do to be with you. Venus and Virgo is like, I mean, if I can stop what I'm doing, then I will if I can. But if I can't, you know, duty calls. It's just very practically minded with love. It kind of rules conditional love, you know, like under these terms and conditions, and they do apply, that will determine whether or not I love you and how I feel about you. I think one of Pisces Venus Achilles heels is that it has no boundaries. It is boundaryless, which at a certain point that is not good. Virgo Venus has strict, strong boundaries that they don't really let people fall through, except for those people that they see as fixer-uppers, of course. You know, they definitely fall for the people. Like, Venus and Pisces, I think, is better at accepting people as they are and as they come. They just really don't care, because I think that they know that, you know, they have a lot of faults, they've made a lot of mistakes, and so they're a lot more understanding. If you have faults and you make mistakes too, it's kind of like, well, we're all human, right? Virgo Venus is like, I do not have faults. I don't make mistakes. You know, and when I do, I will never make that mistake again, and we don't talk about it, you know, and even then it was still kind of the other person's fault too, right? Very Venus and Virgo. Venus and Virgo will pick people in love that they're like, oh, this person isn't there yet, but oh my God, I can, you know, they're a little fixer-upper, like I can make them into one, right? These can be great interior decorators, house flippers, right? They could see a house that's a fixer-upper, really put elbow grease into it and work into it, and just in general, they could do that with jobs and things, and like it'll turn out really, really, you know, this amazing, marvelous transformation in the end. But with a person in a relationship, it's not always that easy, right? If you put work in and you fix something in a house, it's fixed, for example. We're just using house for no reason. But in a person, it's not, things aren't that linear. So they tend to try to fix people, put in a lot of work, put in a lot of elbow grease. You can't force somebody to be something they're not. And Virgo Venus really thinks that they can do that, if that makes sense. And they can be a little bit unaccepting of people's faults, of people's mistakes, of people's trials and tribulations in life. And they can be unaccepting of theirs too. And they can expect perfection from the people they love, and they can be strong perfectionists in themselves too. However, in saying that, you would think that Virgo Venus is like, you know, the number one person if they see something they don't like in a relationship to leave, but they're actually not. That's the weird part. Virgo Venus is a mutable sign, and something about them, I think, gets talked into always staying. And the belief that, I think it's almost like the belief that they don't want to admit their wrongdoings or their mistakes, and breaking up can do that. Right? Saying that I broke up with this person, it's kind of like, to them, I think, admitting failure. And it's almost like they don't want to admit failure, so they will actually stay with that person. I find them just a lot of times on paper, they're with the exact opposite of the person that they would write and check off from. And then when they get that person, it's just so fucking nonsensical to me. I'm saying that, but I also have a 6th house Venus, which is like the Virgo house, so whatever. You know, these can be big naggers for sure, and I'm sure I can do that too. But anyways, it's like a lot of times I see them writing these checklists of what they want out of somebody, and it's like, if they'll find somebody that checks off like 9 out of the 10, but like they're like, oh, they don't check off that final one, I'm not going for them. And you're like, okay, queen, I guess have boundaries, right? You know what you want. And then they'll find somebody that checks off none of them, maybe 1 at the most, right? And they'll be like, oh my God, but I've fallen for them, like they're the one. And it's like, pick one. Like, are you going with the list or not? They can kind of not let love happen, if that makes sense. They can, I think, miss out on some opportunities out of a fear. They can say no a lot to things, and like they can really also, you know, Venus is pleasure. They can, a lot of times Venus in Virgo doesn't experience much fun and much pleasure. They kind of can get stuck in these like menial tasks, doing things for others, serving others, taking care of others, really laboring away, right? And they might even have fun doing these like little labor things. It's just very restrictive. It's not very fun. They have trouble letting loose. They have trouble like breaking rules, even rules that are obviously like kind of meant to be broken. They can be real hinged on them and stuck on them. But then also they can secretly, because it's a mutable sign, they can secretly break them. But then it's like, it doesn't make sense. I don't know. But these people can just be very strict on themselves. And it's like the planet of fun and pleasure and like enjoyment is in the sign of service. You know, that's why it's in its fall. I kind of have to agree with this one. In my head, I'm like, they chose Venus being exalted for Pisces because they were all like, well, Virgo Venus is in its fall. And everyone was like, well, yeah. Even I feel like the Virgo Venuses will be like, yeah, I agree. Like, you know, maybe with some, like the Libras will be like, that's kind of rude that my sun's considered in its fall, or even especially like Scorpio moons. I'm sure they'll run to defend their moon in the comments about how like deeply emotionally vibrant and mysterious they are, and how much more depth they have than other moon placements, which is valid. But I feel like Virgo Venus will run to the comments and say, I completely agree. This fucking placement's in its fall. Like, where is the love? And it's not like I think you're a terrible person with Venus and Virgo. I more just like feel bad for you. I think the opposite. I think you're probably a really good friend and you try really hard to be a good person, and so you probably are, but you get too a little bit caught up in it. You know what I mean? Mars is in its domicile in Aries and Scorpio. It's in its detriment in Libra and Taurus, and it's in its exaltation in Capricorn, and its fall in Cancer. This is another one that I'm like, oh, I get this. I get why Mars is exalted in Capricorn, and I get why Mars is in its fall in Cancer. I think that does make sense. You know, Mars is all about like anger, aggression, and it's all like just like mad, selfish, me, I'm getting what I want, I'm going after what I want, you know, and it can really show a lot more vile, more crudely mannered archetypes in life, and Cancer is like, what? Why you gotta be like that? You know, like, you know, it's like, why would I want to be in Mars? That just doesn't sound fun for Cancer. Like, that doesn't sound enjoyable. And I feel like Mars would be mad and pouty it's in Cancer, and bitter about it, and upset, and almost like offended, you know, that this is happening. You know, Mars is upset it's happening, and Cancer is crying that it has to be like this, you know. Mars and Cancer can be very defensive for sure, and these people can get very angry. Like, they can get, you know, we always say like anger is just another expression of an emotion, right? And so Mars and Cancer is the living, breathing example of that. It is expressing its emotions in a very volatile, very loud, extreme way. Mars in Cancer also can get stepped on very easily. It doesn't like to defend itself. It doesn't like to argue. It doesn't like to fight. It doesn't like to bring conflict. It wants everything to be peaceful and happy and calm. And it can also show like an imbalance of nurturing. Like, when you wanted to be nurtured, instead of getting nurtured, you just got yelled at. Instead of getting nurtured, you just got like left out on your own to fend for yourself, right? It can be a lack of that Cancerian loving quality. It just doesn't have the gusto. It can also be sometimes a little bit lazy, a little bit even like apathetic towards work. Like, not towards others, but towards work. But it just, I find that it usually like tries to just sleep through work, you know, really can struggle to set goals because it goes back and forth about things. Now, it still is a cardinal energy, and that's why I think like no matter what, Mars in a cardinal sign has some good to it, just because there is more of an ability to focus and pick something and move towards it. But I think Mars in Cancer can be a little bit too reflective, right? Why would you want the sign that's all about being in the past be in the planet that's always moving forward? You know, it just doesn't make much sense. It's very unintuitive. And these people can be very sensitive to people, you know, and cry a lot when they're yelling, cry when they're getting yelled at, not really have that thick of skin. Especially sexually, I think they can be a little bit shy, right? Cancer's a little bit shy, a little bit like, don't look at me. You know, they're definitely not the people that are usually, I'm generalizing, they're usually going to be the ones to like go up to somebody and say, I like you, I pick you. You know, maybe if they have like a bold rest of their chart, potentially, but Mars in Cancer will usually lay back a little bit more and let people come to them and be nervous about it and, you know, hide their affection, or not in like, not in a mean way, but like if they don't know that it's out there yet, you know, it's just a little bit shy, right? The planet that's the most extroverted is in probably the most shy sign. So it's just very unintuitive. It also, I think, can show some violence towards the mother that you saw happen growing up, or like violence and anger towards the feminine or towards a nurturing figure, whether that be male or female, or a nurturing figure be like abused or taken advantage of in some way, which is really hard to see, and nobody likes to see somebody with good intentions being taken advantage of, which I think Mars in Cancer has a lot of themes of. Like I said, if I summarize it, it's the planet that's all about moving forward and the sign that's super reflective and moving backwards a lot and stuck in the past a lot. So it can just create a very sensitive person that struggles to really go after whatever it wants with like a vigorous passion, right? So I think also sometimes Mars in Cancer struggles to take a joke. Also, I feel like because of all the stuff that I mentioned. Jupiter. Okay, so Jupiter. Jupiter is one that I have. Jupiter is in its domicile in Sagittarius and kind of Pisces. And then we have its detriment in Gemini and Virgo. And then we have its exaltation in Cancer and its fall in Capricorn. This is one that I get too. I get both sides of it, honestly. I get why it's in its exaltation in Cancer, and I get why it's in its fall in Capricorn. Now, I do have a pretty positive attitude about this planet, I must say, but I think that's because mine is well placed, like it's well aspected in my chart, other than it being in Capricorn, and I have a bunch of planets in Capricorn, so adding Jupiter in there is kind of good for me. It almost like emphasizes the fact that I'll get to like experience these Capricorn things, but in like a positive way. And I feel like it gives me more of a potential to get to that culmination of Capricorn that I'm obviously trying to get to, if that makes sense. But I could see a lot of other people's relationship with this planet, if they have it in their chart, being a lot more annoyed, I think would be a good word, like really annoyed or maybe kind of bitter about it. So Jupiter is all about everything like big and fun and explosive and expressive and like saying yes to things and going after and exploring, and it's just basically about unrestricted access to the world, right? And Capricorn is all about restriction. You know, it's all about, oh, I better cut myself off, or oh, I better say no to that, or oh, I better make the smart move, or oh, I better think about my future, right? And yes, that's good to have in something like Mars, or, you know, even like, I don't even think that's that bad in a moon placement, or Mercury. But in like this planets where it's all about pleasure, and that's where it's like good to go after pleasure, like Jupiter. Like you want a placement that's just really lucky. You want a sign that has luck instilled into it. And Capricorn is like the most unlucky sign, right? Capricorn is the opposite of just getting something just because. Capricorn has to work for everything it gets. And so in Jupiter, it's just kind of like saying like where you're supposed to get your really easy open-ended rewards that just fall in your lap, you don't. You have to work for them. Things just don't work out for you. You have to work on it and add in sweat and elbow grease no matter what every time. You can also be very restrictive on your good times, or it can even feel like there's some outer force or some higher authority being restrictive on your good times. Like I mentioned, I have a Jupiter in Capricorn. This is a goofy story, but I think back to this as one of like my main pillars of me being like, there's more to this world that we don't know, because there's certain energies that everybody attracts, right? But one of my big ones was when I was like 17 or 18, and obviously like I was with friends and we were trying to get alcohol. Saturn was also going through my 5th house, which is like a thing to note, but this is so Jupiter and Capricorn. We were all obviously trying to get alcohol, and I live in America where you can't drink until you're 21. The whole night everybody's like, don't worry about it. There's this place that sells alcohol and they don't card. And then this girl was like, I've been there a billion times. Like everybody was talking about it. Everybody's like, yeah, we've all been successful in it. Oh my God, don't worry about it. This is so chill. This is so great. Yada, yada, yada. I've been hearing this all day. And of course we get there, and of course it's been shut down, right? You want to know why? Because they didn't card, right? That's why it was shut down. I was like, there's I knew. Like, I knew I wouldn't get this easily. You know what I mean? Like, it's very Jupiter and Capricorn, like, right? And it was like me and my other friend that has Jupiter and Capricorn, and we were the only two people in that big group that had never been there, right? So that's just very Jupiter and Capricorn kind of experience to me. I know it's like a goofy one, but it's just like restricting your ability to have fun, you know, in a good way. You know, Jupiter and Capricorn, you know, there's always good and bad. In a good way, I think that Jupiter and Capricorn has a good head on its shoulders to not go too far into the deep end in things, especially if it's a well aspected, or, you know, it's not like square your sun, square your Venus or something where it's innately more indulgent. I do think Jupiter and Capricorn has an ability, like Jupiter and Cancer actually, to be satiated. I'm a Venus in Sagittarius. I can go big or go home sometimes, but, you know, sometimes I really do just go home. You know, I have a Jupiter in Capricorn. Like, I can stop at the end of the day, even if I do go a little bit crazier than most. I can just go home, if that makes sense, with Jupiter and Capricorn. That a lot of, like, even like Jupiter and Sagittarius would never be able to turn anything down, would never be able to say no, would never be able to kind of manage themselves in some way. So I think Jupiter and Capricorn gives a good thing there. But sometimes I am a little bit envious of people that, in a weird way, really get pleasure out of things. Like, I think a lot of the reason why I can stop myself and go home when I want, because I just don't have as big of, like, I think this is very Jupiter and Capricorn, which is why I'm bringing it up. I just don't have as a big of a pleasure center, or like appetite for pleasure, or ability to like enjoy pleasure, I think, as most people do, if that makes sense. And I think that's part of the reason why I can just like stop. Right? But also, what I always like to say about Jupiter and Capricorn, I'm kind of mad I didn't start off with, is how Jupiter and Capricorn always has to work for things, has to work for its luck. It's not just handed to it. It has to like put in elbow grease to get the things that it gets. However, in saying that, I do like it in that it's like a promise that hard work will be rewarded. You know, like, I think that a lot of times I'm more willing to do things and go forward with it, because in my head, I'm like, my hard work will be rewarded eventually. And the harder I work, the more rewards I'll get. And that is true. And like, yeah, sometimes it sucks because it's not like things really just happen like easily or with a snap of a finger with me. It usually takes some time. But again, just because it takes time, I'm still really happy at the end of the day, because I feel like I deserved it and I feel like I really worked for it. This is another like, yeah, I do totally see why it's in its fall, but I'm not unhappy having this placement. I don't mind it that much. You know, sometimes I feel a little bit more robotic than others, but I do think that it can have its benefits. Also, in a really good way, just like how Jupiter in Cancer can show a really good home, it does show, I think, Jupiter in Capricorn, that you were kind of have more stability than most growing up, or you were provided for or taken care of in a more practical way growing up, which I definitely relate to. I might have not been very nurtured emotionally, but I was definitely very practically taken care of from the ages 0 to 18. My parents always had a home and they always had jobs to take care of it, and they worked really hard, but I always knew that if I was really hungry and I asked for food, they would feed me. And that's a big deal. And I think that Jupiter and Capricorn can give that kind of material abundance in the long run, especially material abundance in the long run, but also like material security. Now, as I've gotten older, I've lost a lot of that, I will say, but I will say from 0 to 18, I definitely had that. And I think that's a core thing that it's almost like instilled in me something very secure, if that makes sense. But yes, so I don't think it's that bad of a placement, but also I'm like, psh, yeah, it's in its fall, you know, like luck doesn't just get luck. Like, it's not just lucky. Like, I'm not going to win a lottery. You know what I mean? And I also think in my head subconsciously, I'm like, I wouldn't win a lottery because I would get upset if it was that easy. It would feel unrewarding to me a little bit. I don't know, which is, I'm like, ugh, that's a stupid mentality to have. Take the money and run. Like, I don't know. Whatever. Let's move on. Saturn. Okay, so this is another one that I have. Oh my God, look at this. Okay, so Saturn. Saturn is in its domicile in Capricorn and Aquarius. It's in its detriment in Cancer and Leo. It's exalted in Libra, and so that means that Saturn is in its fall in Aries. This is one that I feel like everybody talks about, like, yeah, Saturn's in its fall in Aries. Or like whenever anybody has a Saturn in Aries, I feel like astrologers are always like, ooh, see how they have a Saturn in Aries? Like, I don't know what it is. Like, I don't think people point out Jupiter in Capricorn or like other placements that much, as they, like, the second somebody sees a Saturn in Aries, they're like, Saturn in Aries. I feel like this is one that everybody considers in its fall. I feel like if anybody knows, I don't know why it is, but I feel like if anybody knows of any placements in their fall, everybody's like, well, we know Saturn is in its fall in Aries. Anyway, so the reason why Saturn is in its fall in Aries is because Saturn is mindful and demure, and Aries is fucking not, right? Like Saturn is all about patience, and Aries is the most impatient sign out there. My dad used to always like be so mad at me and tell me about how little patience I had. And he would always tell me about how much patience he has because he's a Saturn in Capricorn. He'd always be yelling at me saying he has so much patience, he has so much patience. And I'm the most impatient person. And it's like, well, yeah, because you're not picking things up quickly. I'm just kidding. But Saturn in Aries is basically whenever it sees problems, it needs to fix them now, right? You know how I said Libra will kind of like be like, oh, like, let's take a second. And Capricorn, like, let's take a second, especially, but Libra a little bit more. Okay. Like, let's take a second. Let's assess this problem. Let's figure it out. What's the best decision to go towards, you know? Saturn and Capricorn will just kind of innately know what they think is the best way to go about solving this problem, right? Whereas Saturn in Aries is like, whether it knows or not how to solve the problem, it's gonna solve it, and it's gonna solve it now. And it's not gonna ask you, it's not gonna ask you, it's not gonna think about it, it's not gonna dwell about it, it's not gonna say, oh, here, we'll put a pin in it, and I'll come back when I'm more fresh and smarter, and you know, my brain's more put together because I'm tired or whatever. No. If there's a problem, it has to confront it now, and it can't walk away from it. And this is also something that I've noticed in my relationships as well. I'll like totally call myself out on, like, whenever there's a relationship problem or an issue, I want it resolved now, and I can be really impatient about it. And I've had to teach myself really aggressively over the years to let things simmer. I don't want to do that, right? I just want to explode and get mad and angry and solve the problem with fists and anger. Not literally fists. I don't just go around punching people, okay? I don't. And that impatientness can be really the Achilles heel, right? A Saturn in Aries is not going to be the kind of person that will touch a hot pan and be like, oh, it's hot, I better not do that again. Like a Saturn in Aries will touch the hot pan multiple times, never learning its lesson, because it almost is like, oh, I'll deal with my burnt hand later. Right? I don't know if that makes sense, but I always see this with Saturn and Aries. Like, I even have this mentality, like, if I watch something fall, I'm just gonna let it fall instead of like actually trying to pick it up. Like, oh, well, I dropped it. Like, Saturn and Aries can be very clumsy. Like, it has problems with Aries, so it can be very unagile. It gets frustrated. It gets frustrated so easily. And it can have like a lot of tantrums. Like when there's a problem or there's something going wrong, it just gets really mad and it gets really angry and it gets really frustrated, and it can have problems subsiding those tantrums and subsiding those Aries-like qualities. And it can also, with Saturn and Aries, have trouble with autonomy. Saturn just basically shows whatever your issues are, whatever your problems are. Like kind of how I mentioned with Saturn in Leo, how it restricts self-expression. Saturn in Aries will sometimes restrict like autonomy, and will restrict being able to stand up for yourself, being able to argue, being able to fight in like a practical way that helps them out, if that makes sense. It can just be very like blinded by its own rage and blinded by its own need to solve anything now and like trudge through it. I think that we're the worst cooks. I have literally never met a Saturn in Aries that can cook. I think we're too impatient and we don't understand the like, ooh, I gotta wait for it to simmer and then flavor and then do this and do that. I think Saturn in Aries is like, I will just eat whatever. Like a little bit like, sometimes I really don't care if food tastes bad. Like it just doesn't matter that much to me, which also might be Jupiter and Capricorn. But I think Saturn in Aries is just too impatient and too disconnected to cook. Now, in a good way, I do think that Saturn in Aries is much more determined than Saturn in Cancer, where Saturn in Cancer struggles to set goals and give itself deadlines and be, on themselves. I think Saturn in Aries, where it shines, is really being able to set a goal and focus on it and hone in on it and achieve it. Now, when they're young, I think there can be this thing of like, whatever the thing is I set my mind on, I'm gonna do it and I won't back down because I have too much pride and I'm just gonna keep going and can get blinded by it. But I do think that once they get older and they mature and they know themselves more, because it does take Saturn in Aries an obscenely long time to know and understand themselves because it's an Aries. I think once they do grow up and mature a little bit, like even around their Saturn return, they're able to really set those goals that are beneficial to them because now they know themselves and they're not setting somebody else's goals or whatever it might be. And they're really able to focus on it and pay attention to it and get towards it. And like, no matter what comes towards them, they'll keep going because they're Aries and they're not going to lose. They're not going to back down. There can be some stubbornness with this for sure, like as I've kind of mentioned, but sometimes that can be good when it's goal setting and you know something is right and true for you. And sometimes Saturn in Aries has struggles with the belief in themselves, like a lot. They can really struggle with self-confidence. But I think especially at their Saturn return, at least hopefully, maybe, we'll see. But my head, in my astrological head, I would think during their Saturn return, that's when they actually start to learn themselves more. And those goals that they set are more beneficial for them rather than just setting goals just to set them. Because I definitely can do that. But just to summarize it, it's just very unintuitive because Saturn is all about like slow, steady progress. And Aries is all about now, me want now. Uranus. So Uranus is in its domicile in Aquarius. It's in its detriment in Leo. It's in its exaltation in Scorpio. And it's in its fall in Taurus. So this is another one where I'm like, I think they chose Uranus being exalted in Scorpio because they thought, they all were like, where would Uranus be in its fall in? And they all went Taurus, you know? And the reason is because Taurus is so stubborn. It doesn't want to move. It doesn't want to change. It wants nothing to do with revolution. It wants nothing to do with anything new. It doesn't care about what's great for the wider humanity. It just cares about its own safety and its own security. That's all it cares about, or at least if not just their own safety security, like the safety and security of their like immediate family and friends, right? Like who cares about what's going on across the country or what's going on in this higher thing? Like, does it affect me and my family? No. Which can be good and why I like Taurus energy in a personal planet. However, Uranus is all about the collective. Uranus is all about the planet in us that forces us to look at the collective and forces us to be that humanitarian and think about greater humanity. Taurus doesn't want to do that, right? So Uranus was last in Taurus. Well, it's currently in Taurus, but the time before that, the now that was in Taurus was 1935 to 1942. And I'm going to bring that in, so I wanted to bring it up. But Uranus is also currently in Taurus, actually. It went into Taurus in 2018, and it's actually going to go out pretty soon in July of 2025. The last time before this time that Uranus was in Taurus was during World War II, okay, and especially like the height of Nazism. And I can see Uranus and Taurus really representing the rise of Nazism, because Nazism was all about kind of like getting back to the German roots. Like that was really where it stemmed from, at least. You know, Hitler was very third house moon. He was very much like all about his community and his German people and retaking Germany back to being very German, right? That's very Uranus and Taurus. Like I even think about nowadays, what's been popular in this current Uranus and Taurus, make America great again. Let's go back to when America was great. Let's reform America to how it was before, Uranus and Taurus, right? I think of Uranus and Taurus as very conservative. And this is even, I think that liberals can go so far that they can be almost like conservative in their liberalism because they're so in their own bubble with it. I feel like the way that politics are right now is that it's like the opposite of Pluto and Aries, how I was talking about that in the last video, where, you know, I feel my way about how the world should go and you feel your way, and we could talk about it, but we could still be friends. Nowadays, with Uranus and Taurus, it's like there are two bubbles, right? People that are alt-left, or, you know, even like the fact that there was like the rise of Nazism around like that 2020 time is like the high, around like when Uranus was really sat in Taurus there, makes a lot of sense to me. The people that are on the far right, that are really conservative, that are like neo-Nazi kind of thing, like they're so like, you know, everybody that thinks outside of me is wrong and I don't want anything to hear about it and I'm so stubborn on my views. And then, but on the same vein, the people that are on the far left, or even the left doesn't exist anymore. The right doesn't exist anymore. It's all far left and far right. If you ask me, everybody's very extreme right now, right? Nobody can intermingle. Nobody can talk to other people. Nobody can have differing political views. You literally are like, it's almost like it's a betrayal to have a differing political view. I feel like it's just so stubborn, Uranus and Taurus, right? What's mine is mine. What's my views, you have to have as well. You know, very Uranus and Taurus. The collective has to think like me. The collective has to have my opinions, and I'm stubborn in them, and I won't change, and I won't hear anything differently. I won't even associate with anybody that's at all different to me politically, because it's you know, because it's bigger than that, it's greater than that, da 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 da, right? But it's created such a divide, which I feel like is very Uranus and Taurus to me. And also it makes so much sense, like Uranus and Taurus 2020, like that, you know, when COVID hit and everything, the rise in inflation was insane. That's very Uranus and Taurus, right? Unreliable changes in finances and security. And what do we want to be secure in this world? Like, I think we all want to be secure in this world is our money, our finances, right? Like, we all can agree with that in some way, form, or shape. And Uranus really struggles with that, right? It makes sense that nobody can buy a house now. You know, it makes sense that the housing market is also completely high highs and low lows. Like, everybody just has a landlord, and the rich have 1,000 houses and the poor have none, right? Uranus and Taurus just has such a strong divide. I kind of talked about that a little bit with Pluto and Taurus. And I do think that it can kind of reflect it in this way, because I do say that Uranus and Taurus share that commonality of change and cycles, right? Uranus is more abrupt, quick little changes, all these little things and all this chaos. Pluto is more like one big rise and one big fall and then one big regenerative action, you know? It makes sense that neither of these planets do well in Taurus, because Taurus is like, this is my patch of grass. I'm not destroying it. I'm not changing it. This is mine. Get away. Also, during this time, the last time was the rise of autocrats, which is basically when it's just like one person who has absolute power, right? That's very Uranus and Taurus. I'm almost a little bit concerned with Gen Alpha with their Uranus and Taurus, because they can be hyper conservative or hyper liberal, and I feel like they will only further divide themselves, if that makes sense, and not change and have the same political views that they held when they were a kid, and not evolve and change them as I think that we should as we grow up and we grow older and things change and adjust. It's almost like they won't. They'll have a lot of trouble evolving and growing as people. You know how everybody's like unevolved and evolved in astrology, right? Like Uranus and Taurus is like what I feel like is like unevolved a little bit. I know that's like so rude to put that on somebody, but it's like, I think Uranus as a whole, the whole point of the placement is unevolved, if that makes sense. There's also a lot of selfishness, especially with like Uranian type things, which are like in the environment, humanitarian aspects, charity, right? There's a lot of mine nature, Uranus and Taurus. And like, give me Robux, you know, kind of situation. I want Robux, I want Robux, I want Robux. They're not sharers, you know what I mean? Like, probably because of a fear of like, what if I don't have it one day? What if it's gone? What if it's ripped out from under my fingers? Mine, right? I really think that Gen Alpha and Gen Z are gonna have some troubles, because Gen Z is obviously all about like, what's mine is yours and what's yours is mine, and gonna give back to the needy, and, you know, tries to really help everybody and do protests. And Gen Alpha is just not really going to give a shit. I know people make fun of Gen Z, but they can really band together online about things. And I know that, you know, they get shit, or I guess we get shit, because we can only band together online for things, but I don't even think Uranus and Taurus will band together online. I think it'll just be like, I am my own rock, or like, what is it when it's like, I am my own ocean, or something like that. Feels very Uranus and Taurus. I also think it's very Uranus and Taurus that during this time, it's like nobody can afford anything, but we also have, you know, the ultimate pleasure at our fingertips that nobody has ever had before. Even if you're broke and don't have anything, you probably still have a phone and you have access to everything. It's almost very like Uranus and Taurus. Like, we don't have the simplicities of life that is in chaos, but we have these like ultimate high pleasures. It's very dystopian a little bit, I think, Uranus and Taurus. But let's move on to Neptune. So I've been looking a little more into this, and I'm stressed out and confused, because during the middle of this next segment where I talk about how Neptune is in its fall in Aquarius, I actually realized that I had thought this whole time that Neptune was in its fall in Capricorn, and I've been told that before. I've been told that on like astrological websites many times before, with like calculations saying that my Neptune is in its fall in Capricorn, and now I'm looking everywhere and I'm all confused and I don't understand. And so I've been looking into it more, and basically I'm like right kind of both ways. I guess there's like a bunch of debate around what Neptune and Pluto are in their exaltation in, and so because of that, nobody's even sure, it seems, like what their fall would even be considered, which is kind of making a little bit more sense. And I guess because with Pluto you can have like Aries, Leo, and a few others. Even with Neptune, for example, people consider Neptune in Cancer being exalted, Neptune in Sagittarius being exalted, never heard that one, Neptune in Leo being exalted, and then also Neptune in Aquarius being exalted. How can both Leo and Aquarius be considered exalted in one planet? That doesn't make any sense. They're opposites. So I don't think anybody knows what they're talking about, and I don't think anybody has a surefire answer, and I think everybody's confused. So the consensus seems to be that, like, yeah, Uranus is exalted in Scorpio and it's fallen Taurus, but nobody can decide about Pluto and Neptune, which is really annoying and really weird. So I don't know. If you have a better answer than that, let me know in the comments. But I'm going to leave these segments in because I just still think that what I said is kind of interesting if you want to learn about the generational planets a little bit more. But take the exaltation thing, I guess, with a grain of salt, guys. So Neptune is in its domicile in Pisces, it's in its detriment in Virgo, it's in its exaltation in Leo, and Neptune is in its fall in Aquarius. Speaking of Gen Zs, here's another one. Neptune was last in Aquarius from 1998 to 2012. That is what I consider is the Gen Z block, pretty much exactly. So yes, I do not have this. I am a millennial as far as my Neptune placement goes. I'm a middle child. I thought Neptune... I may be going crazy, but I swear to God, I just realized, like, when I was learning about astrology, I thought Neptune was in its fall in Capricorn. Why did I always think that, and why did I always read that? And now I'm looking online just to making sure I'm not crazy, and everybody's saying it's exalted in Leo and its fall in Aquarius, but I swear to God, this stuff is so annoying. This doesn't even make any sense. Leo, Aquarius, Cancer, or Sagittarius. Maybe I'm crazy. Neptune is considered in its fall in Aquarius, which is the Gen Z time. I think the reason why it's in its fall is because Neptune is all about, like, disillusionment. And with Neptune in Aquarius, I feel like it makes you disillusioned by who you are. I think it shows a lot of identity issues and a lot of confidence issues. I think it almost shows a lot of aggressively aligning yourself with the greater idea. Trouble individualizing yourself. I think what I think is that Neptune in Aquarius is what's responsible and why Gen Z has all the labels and has a lot of different genders and pronouns, and it's because they're very disillusioned by what group they fit into. They're very disillusioned by trying to find a group and a subgenre that they feel like encapsulates their whole personality, right? Like, even like having all these like blah 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 cores. Like, are you cottagecore? Are you fairy core? Are you trash can in a dumpster core, right? Like, there's a bunch of cores, right? And that's like Neptune and Aquarius, like where we used to just have like jocks, geeks, smart asses, hippies, theater kids or whatever. Like, there used to just be like a few groups and a few divisions. With Neptune and Aquarius, it's almost like there's so many, it's multiplied by 1,000, right? And I do think that Gen Z feels this obligation to be able to categorize themselves while also feeling like any category they put themselves into, they don't fit in perfectly, but also needing to fit into the category that they label themselves with perfectly, but also getting a little bit weird if they do fit into a category perfectly, because there's a little bit of that like Aquarius complex that comes into it, right? It's almost just like everybody's vying to be more weird than the next person. It's almost also Neptune and Aquarius kind of like glorifying oppression, which I think is a Gen Z problem a little bit. Like, like everybody's oppressed, and everybody is oppressed. Like, let's be real. If you're here on Earth, that sucks. Like, that sucks, and we're all dealing with it, and it's all stupid. But Neptune and Aquarius can really almost like glorify the underdog and only want to be the underdog, and sometimes will put themselves in this position of oppression because they glorify it so much. Also, it was the first generation that grew up from when they were little to when they're, forever with technology, right? They were the first real, like, they don't remember a time without technology sort of generation. You're disillusioned by technology, basically, and there's a hyper dependency on technology as well. Like, what is Gen Z's like major criticism from like the very Leo-esque boomer generation is that they don't know how to do anything without technology. We don't know how to just rely on ourselves or rely on our social skills, right? Like, because of technology, which is like, Neptune is all about being disillusioned and codependency. Because of technology, we almost don't know how to socialize, right? That's another big criticism of Gen Z as well. They don't know how to properly socialize, right? Aquarius, they don't know how to form groups. They don't know how to go out there. They're very isolated in a lot of ways, which Neptune and Aquarius can can show like we're so interconnected, which is very Aquarius, but the more interconnected we are, the more isolated we become. It's just so Aquarius. And with Neptune, it creates the disillusionment and the confusion with it all, you know? Everyone is also disillusioned to believing that they're the number one leader in their own revolution, if that makes sense. Whereas Uranus and Taurus wants nothing to do with the revolution, Neptune and Aquarius almost makes everything a little bit of a revolution. So Aquarius is overthinking. Like Aquarius overthinks everything, I think. It's like makes everything way too complicated, way more complicated than it needs to be, and it struggles to just be. I've mentioned this before with Sun in Aquarius. And Neptune can't handle all this overthinking. Neptune can't handle all this over-analyzation of things. Like, oh my God, it's so confused. It's so overwhelmed. I can't do it. You know what I mean? Also, I think the fact that like social media stardom made it so that Gen Z is disillusioned by social media and by the fact that anybody can be a star on social media, very like Neptune and Aquarius, and like anybody can earn money, easy money through being a social media star, through being online. Everybody works online now. Whereas Neptune and Leo was like, oh, I'm going to be a star because of me and by putting myself out there and performing and, you know, seeing me live. Neptune and Aquarius is like, you know, everybody's gonna love me because I'm pre-recorded, because of a pre-recorded me, you know, because of how I present myself in social media wise, and they're almost disillusioned by, you know, anybody can strike rich and be famous at any point because they'll get picked up on social media and they'll have a bunch of followers. Like Neptune and Leo generation, I think, was disillusioned by like, oh, any day now my time will come when I get discovered by a manager and my life will turn upside down. Neptune and Aquarius is like, I can wake up one morning and have 1 million followers kind of situation. This also, I think, creates unreliable friends in another way. Like, let's be real, like Gen Z is like the flakiest generation, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but I just mean that more in like a Neptune and Aquarius generation is the most likely to like cancel plans, not show up to plans, not go out, not go to where, like not be social, like go someplace and then not socialize. Like they can just really they can just be really unreliable with their friendships. In a good way, Neptune and Aquarius definitely expresses their spirituality in a very unique and really genuine and a really new kind of way, right? That makes sense that the Gen Z generation, I think, is a lot more open to astrology than the previous generations. And I think Neptune and Aquarius has a lot to do with it. It also has a lot to do with like there's a new way to label, you know what I mean? In summary, Neptune is in its fall in Aquarius. Maybe. It's because it's almost like hyper codependency, right? Where it's almost like everybody is so interconnected that there becomes this loss of individuality, right? And then there's this fear that, oh my God, I'm going to lose my individuality, so I'm going to overly state it and I'm going to like swing too far the other way, if that makes sense. Neptune and Aquarius is really microtrend final boss. You know what I was also thinking about? How Aquarians are at fault. Or Aquarius energy is at fault for the trend cycle. Like obviously Aquarius rules trends, but the fact that the trend cycle has been sped up so insanely that we have these like micro trend final bosses kind of situation, it makes sense because Aquarius is all about like, oh, I'm not going to do something if it becomes too popular. Right? So when somebody's really popular and they do something, everybody follows along with it. Neptune and Leo would double down and be like, yes, I am the originator of this and I'm going to keep doing it because it's my iconic thing. It's my signature move. It's my signature staple and I'm not going to get tired of it and you're not going to get tired of it and I do it best, right? Neptune and Aquarius is more like, oh, you started wearing the Brazil shirt? No, I'm not going to wear the Brazil shirt and I'm going to move on to something new. Like Neptune and Aquarius is really the whole, I think has a lot to do with overconsumption, right? This is popular and now I want nothing to do with it and now I'm going to want to go into the next thing. Like it really sped up the cycle of fast fashion. It really, if not created fast fashion, honestly. All right, let's just move on. I know this video is so long. Let's talk about Pluto. Okay, so Pluto is in its domicile in Scorpio. It's in its detriment in Taurus. It's in its exaltation in Aries. And that also means that Pluto is in its fall in Libra. Pluto was last in Libra from 1971 to 1984, which is pretty much exactly Gen X. So who is Gen X anyways? Like what would we really categorize as Gen X? What would really say this is a staple of Gen X? Being a middle child between boomers and millennials? Because that's what I think of them as. I think they're the generational middle child of the world, right? Who really talks about Gen X? Like what are really their stereotypes? I don't know, they're Pluto and Libra, right? And a lot of them have Uranus in Libra too. They don't really have much they stand for. They'll stand for what you stand for, but if you don't stand for it as much as them, then they won't stand for it that much. Like they can just be really nervous to stand up for themselves, and they don't really have much autonomy. The main thing I think with Gen X is that they saw the breaking down of the nuclear family. They saw like all their parents getting divorces and that being the first time socially acceptable to be divorced, right? Pluto in Libra. There's this breakdown of relationships. There's this loss of the nuclear family. There's this loss of this really strong marriage and relationship, right? These people are very generous and appropriate and just kind of like calm and meek, I feel like Pluto in Libra would be. Like Pluto in Aries, I said it was like, oh my God, I was like, that's fucking tyrannical. Like that's too hard the other way. Whereas Pluto is too hard the other way, and tip the scales too far over and is, I think, just too meek and too meager and blends into the background because they don't have a strong Pluto, right? Gen Z, Pluto in Sagittarius, you're gonna notice them because they're gonna scream it. Millennials, Pluto in Scorpio, you're going to notice them because they have this magnetism to them. Pluto in Virgo, you're going to notice them because they're nagging and screaming at you and telling you why you suck. But Pluto in Libra is like, I'm just the middle child here. I guess I'll be the mediator between these two really extreme generations, that is boomers and millennials, that are always fighting, always having trouble, always butting heads. Ooh, you know, not very good for Pluto. They're kind of striving for equality at the loss of their autonomy. And I also think that Pluto and Libra can really just kind of do what their parents told them to do and might have troubles questioning it. I think they can just kind of take everything at face value and have troubles really, maybe they'll investigate it and be curious about it, but I don't know if they'll do anything with their newfound answers or revelations. Also very manipulative relationships as well. Like relationships are all, what can I get from you? What are you taking from me? That's not good either. We don't want to have those kinds of relationships. It also makes sense that Gen X is the kind of like the last generation that really had to grow up and learn how to socialize, right? Like most people didn't like cell phones until they're probably in like high school or college, until they're much older, right? And they really grew up and had their full childhood without, like, yes, they had some technology, of course, there were televisions, but they didn't have such on-demand technology, so that they still had to be like, oh, I'm going over to my friend's house to use their technology because not everybody has it, you know, like they're the one friend with the video game console, you know, that kind of thing. It's not like nowadays where everybody has like a PS4 or PS5 or something like that, you know. And so because of that, Libra is all about socialization and Pluto is all about the end of something. So it's like the last generation that had to learn how to socialize in real life. Also, I think Britney Spears is a perfect example of Pluto in Libra. I think there is kind of like some shameful sexuality around that, right? I definitely think that Pluto in Libra would be like anorexia culture. It makes sense that Gen X really were like older and like really experiencing the time of like Y2K anorexia culture, right? They were like in their 20s and 30s when they were feeling it the most. And this like, oh my God, everybody's fat, right? That's very Pluto in Libra, right? Like skinny, 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 skinny. Like Y2K skinny culture is literally like, let's take up as little space as possible. Like literally, Pluto and Libra. As little amount of space in the world as we possibly can. And these like pretty tropes are like the most utmost of importance right now. And those pretty tropes can make or break you. Like this is totally the time of tabloids and like seeing all those really toxic magazines, and the paparazzi is very Pluto and Libra, like cringing on your personal social space and telling you what's pretty, what's in, and being very shallow about it as well, right? Like I said, like Pluto needs to be in like a more spiritual sign in some way, form, or shape, and Libra is not a very spiritual energy. It's a little bit more shallow stereotypically, and it's a little bit more surface level, so that's not really good for Pluto. That needs to dive deep to the bottom of things, right? Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
We have done my entire Essential Dignity series. Oh my God, I kind of didn't realize that. Wow, this is the last video I'm filming here. It has been a month that I've been filming these videos. I feel like that's crazy. So yeah, my whole little Essential Dignity series is up. It's done. We have truly got into the heart of 201 here. Sorry if the light is being really extreme right now. It's just the heavens are shining down on me, you know, now that I finished the series. But yes, I'm really happy about this. I feel like we're really getting places now in this Learn Astrology course, right? I'm excited to get to more advanced topics, truly. So I won't be starting it next week. I want to do just a few videos that don't have to do with the Learn Astrology course series. And also, if you feel like I've left anything out in in 101, let me know. I know I haven't done like every single planet and all the signs. I'm sure I'll eventually get to that, but there are some concepts in astrology that I really want to cover, and I don't know, I will eventually get and talk about each, individual planetary placement. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. I appreciate your support, and I appreciate you watching this little series. I hope that it's been helping you learn. And again, if you have these placements and you want to add anything about them in the comments, please do. I'm super curious. Also, again, I'm like so distracted now because I'm just like, wow, I can't believe this series is over. Like, I'm really reflecting here, very Cancer rising. I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. If you want to chat with me, let me talk about your chart, gossip, whatever the fuck. I also have an astrology TikTok that if you want to gossip about other people's charts, you totally can on my lives every Monday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. And I also have a personal Instagram. But yes, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. I appreciate all your support, and I appreciate all the lovely comments that you guys have left. Thank you so much. But yes, all right, bye.